I want to express my gratitude to Rabbi Emil Hirsch for his extraordinary presentation this morning, and I'm equally grateful for the initiative that he has taken, together with lay leaders and staff members, to launch the Recharging Reform Judaism project. We are at a critical moment in the history of Reform Judaism, and Rabbi Hirsch has had the courage to say things that needed to be said. And for that, we are all in his debt. Our session this morning is entitled, The Next Chapter, Zionism, Jewish Peoplehood, and Jewish Leadership. I wonder if somebody could get me some water. I'll introduce the topic, expand somewhat on what Ami said, and then we'll hear from our three panelists, all of whom are engaged in the concrete work of advancing these values. The next chapter is important precisely because the current chapter is so unsettling. As recently as a generation ago, few would have questioned that the Reform movement was deeply committed to the principle of Klal Yisrael. We knew that there existed a single Jewish people, the collective community of Israel, and that to live as a Jew means to grieve with the sorrows of other Jews and to rejoice in their triumphs. However divided we were on politics, we still recognized that civic rituals relating to Israel and peoplehood belonged to everyone. We still joined in shared celebration of our Zionism. We still affirmed our shared inheritance of Jewish living. But compare then with now. Today, from without and within, our shared affirmations of Israel, Zionism, and peoplehood have been profoundly eroded. The contempt and frenzied self-righteousness of enemies and anti-Semites have seeped deep into public consciousness. Look at the world in which we live. In London and Manchester, in Netherlands and Michigan, in Pittsburgh and Bondi Beach, the unhinged barbarism of Hamas has created savage precedents for other Jew haters. In many Arab countries, anti-Semitism remains the official ideological doctrine. And in Europe, in country after country, Jews are removing their kippot and stars of David because they are afraid to walk down the street as Jews. Europe is soaked with Jewish blood, but the Europeans not only criticize Israel, they do so in a vicious and intemperate way. When an Israeli child dies, they call it unfortunate. When a Palestinian child dies, they call it a war crime. They make excuse after excuse for Hamas, and by their reticence encourage them in their murderous ways. And that is not all. Simultaneously and incredibly, anti-Semitism has emerged not only from the ranks of the hoodlums and the thugs, but from the supposedly credentialed and educated classes who seem to assume that advanced degrees entitle them to exemption from accepted moral standards. In a sense, it is the elites who pose the greatest danger because they provide a stamp of societal approval for everyone else. As a lifelong Democrat, what am I to make of the obsession of Democratic primary voters with avoiding any positive word about Israel? And what am I to make of the preposterous writings of Nicholas Kristof on the so-called dog rape of Palestinians, of the absurd pronouncements of Candace Owens about the Jews, of the ominous references of Tucker Carlson on Israel? What am I to make of the places of prestige in America? The universities, the publishing houses, and the cultural institutions that have turned against the Jews with a barely suppressed sneer. And deeply troubling, too, is the breakdown of the Zionist consensus in our own ranks, in both Israel and the diaspora. According to recent polls, as Rabbi Hirsch mentioned, nearly half of young Americans believe that the U.S. relationship with Israel is mostly a burden to America. And many of these young people are Jews, our children, our students, our responsibility. We have watched in horror as Jewish students, not all but more than a few, have become advocates of Israel's delegitimization, framing Israel as a settler colonial project. And lastly, we are witnessing the appearance of a barbarous Judaism in the state of Israel. Most Israelis, most of the time, want absolutely nothing to do with this Judaism. I repeat, most Israelis, most of the time, want absolutely nothing to do with this Judaism. But there it is, led by Itamar Ben-Gvir, a far-right Kahanist, a Jewish supremacist, and as close to a neo-fascist as you can get. We have read a lot about him in recent days. He is the primary mover of a Messianist campaign to evict Palestinians from Gaza and from their grazing lands in the West Bank. The danger that these Messianists posed should not be underestimated. Among the many threats that Israel faces, high on the list is the threat of nice Jewish boys armed with pistols taking their orders directly from God. But now we come to the good news, because there is good news. Having said all of this, where does that leave us? I have three answers. The first answer is, we stand proudly with Israel. We take pride in the performance of the Israel Defense Forces, a people's army, a citizens' army, which responded to the shock and horror of October 7th by rallying to the war effort and fighting for nearly 3 years with unsurpassed bravery. We take pride in the profound solidarity of Israel's civil society. At a time of existential threat, Israelis have responded with generosity, compassion, and countless acts of volunteerism. We take pride in the way that, despite the confusions of the young, Jews around the world have rallied to Israel's side. Zionism is not dead, not yet, thank God. We are not naive about Israel. We can't simply sing Hatikvah, engage in selective admiration of the good while ignoring the bad. But far more important, never will we schrei Gewalt and turn our backs because loving Israel is not quite as easy as it once was. The Jewish heart is in the Holy Land, said Yehuda Halevi, meaning our hearts as well. The second answer is, we rededicate ourselves to Zionism. The word Zionism has fallen out of favor in recent years. Even Israel's most devoted supporters have ceased to use the term. Moment magazine, in its most recent issue, ran a headline on its front cover, The word Zionism is dead, the headline said. But in fact, to give up on the term is to give up on the idea and to give in to the pressures of the anti-Zionist forces that brutally assault us. And the idea is simplicity itself. Zionism is the commitment to a Jewish and democratic state in the land of Israel. For the Jewish people, it means controlling your destiny, achieving power, mastering the gun, and sometimes misusing power. But this is far better than being powerless in a dangerous world, because in the absence of power, all other Jewish values can be turned to dust. Still, a word of caution is in order here. Yes, without apology, Zionism is an affirmation of Jewish strength. Nonetheless, our history teaches that this will not be accomplished by extremism or by hysteria. It will take sophistication and hard work on the part of the Jewish people. We will remain committed to prudence and pragmatism and to democratic values. And we will do everything within our power to maintain the support and affection of the American people for Israel. And this above all, we must not declare war, even in our hearts, on another people or another religion. An angry and hating minority perpetuates Zionist atrocities against Jews and Israel, and they must be isolated and punished with all the power at our disposal. But we must make every effort to talk with all those who want to live in peace. We have been victims of indiscriminate hatred for far too long to now inflict it on others. Jews have never taught hatred as an answer to hatred, and we will not begin now. And the final answer is, we must not give up on peace. I do not know when peace will come to Israel and her neighbors. There are those who say it will never come and want to retreat to the ghetto, who say we have nothing but enemies. But I do not believe this. Even if it takes a century or more, there is no retreat, no road back. Yes, while the road ahead is full of danger, the road back, the road to yesteryear, leads only to oblivion. I refuse to give up on this legacy, this dream of peace. It was the dream of Ben-Gurion and Rabin, of Jabotinsky and Begin, of Peres and Sharon. I believe it is shared by soldiers weary of fighting, by mothers and fathers weary of weeping, and by Jews and Palestinians weary of a terrible history of blood. We will not squander this inheritance. We will guard it, nurture it, and grow it into a treasure for future generations. We turn now to our three panelists who are doing the work and advocating for Israel, Zionism, and Jewish peoplehood in new and creative ways. I call them up now in alphabetical order. Rabbi Ashira Boxman is the assistant rabbi at Temple Bethel in Boca Raton. She is building Jewish Israel engagement for young Jews and connecting them to Israel both at her congregation and through Artza in Birthright. Julia Jassy is co-founder and CEO of Jewish on Campus, a nationwide and grassroots movement that fights anti-Semitism and advocates for Jewish students at various venues and various levels. Adam Lewis Klein is founder of the Movement Against Anti-Zionism, which confronts anti-Jewish labels and defends the right of all peoples to exist and endure. If our panelists will join us up front now. Apparently we are going to begin with 2 panelists rather than 3, and hopefully we'll have someone else who will join us very quickly. I'm going to, as the eldest member of this group, and I'm going to take the liberty of using first names, and I'm hoping that you're okay with that. And not having met our panelists, Ashira or Julia?
Ashira.
Ashira.
Yeah.
Ashira will. I'm going to ask both of our panelists. You're engaged in very different work to promote Israel and peoplehood. I mentioned it in just a sentence or two. But this exciting creative endeavors in which you find yourselves, I wonder if each of you will take 5 to 6 minutes perhaps, share with us the work that you're doing, how you created it, and how it's been proceeding, and how you see it, and what lessons we might learn, those of us who are in the audience.
Okay, so first of all, I want to say it's really a great honor to be here. This is obviously such an important event. To start, so I founded the movement against anti-Zionism in October of 2025. In a very short time, we have, I will say, managed to transform much of the language and framework that a lot of the Jewish community, especially online and on social media, is using to understand this moment. So my engagement in this work came from my personal experience. I'm an anthropology PhD student at McGill University. I was actually in the Amazon jungle, very far from all of this, working on my PhD. When October 7th happened, I returned to a local town on October 9th. I hadn't had any internet or phone for 3 months, living with a remote tribe. The first thing I saw when I opened my computer was news of the Nova Music Festival. Now, the second thing I saw was the way my left-wing intellectual colleagues immediately were reacting and justifying the October 7th events and genocide. I showed minimal solidarity with Israel, and I was quickly purged from my entire social and professional network. I was told explicitly and made to understand implicitly on numerous occasions that I could not have a career in anthropology if I supported Israel, that my reputation would be destroyed for minimal support of Israel, and any discussion of anti-Semitism, of anti-Jewish hate, calling it out as bigotry, would also result in my reputation being destroyed. So I had a choice at that point. I could be silent and try and preserve my career. I could become a token anti-Zionist Jew. I could use my Jewish identity to legitimize the hate around me, which was something I saw very often. When I tried to respond and object to this hate, I would often see an anti-Zionist Jew come in and say, well, I'm a Jew, nothing is going on here, they hate you because you're Zionist, you're an evil, genocidal, colonial, racist person. Right? I saw that happen over and over again. Or I could speak the truth. I decided to speak the truth, and I started trying to understand what was happening. So I started trying to actually describe anti-Zionism back to anti-Zionists. I started studying the history of anti-Zionism and applying the critical and intellectual tools that I'd learned in the academy to anti-Zionism, because I saw something absolutely fascinating. I had learned in the academy about respect for minority groups. I'd gone to the jungle to think with indigenous people and validate their distinct, enduring peoplehood. When I returned, what I saw was those same frameworks being used to erase our peoplehood, our indigeneity, and our voice. So I said, I'm going to use those same frameworks and apply them accurately, because everything has been turned upside down. And as I studied the history of anti-Zionism, as I engaged with anti-Zionists, what I also found was that anti-Zionism has a history. It's something you can study. And what's really important to understand about this is once you know the history of anti-Zionism, once you've isolated anti-Zionism as its own object and phenomenon, it is not the same thing as Jewish anti-Zionism. Pre-1948, the debates and discussions that were happening, that Rabbi Ami Hirsch alluded to, right? The Pittsburgh platform, when Reform Jews said they would no longer define themselves as a nation, right? These traditions are not the source of contemporary anti-Zionism. So contemporary anti-Zionism, our movement and my intellectual work, has boiled down anti-Zionist ideology to three core libels that are based on the erasure of Jewish peoplehood. This is the new form of Jew hatred. It is the dominant form of Jew hatred. It's no longer classical anti-Semitism of the 19th century and the Nazis. In this image, Jews are white colonizers. Jews are not a people. Jews are just a religion. Jews are white people. Jews are white supremacists. They are racists. And Israel is an inherently genocidal state. That is the ideology that is current within the anti-Zionist movement. Now, if we look at the Pittsburgh platform, right, they did not say any of that. They said, well, we were a nation in the past, but we're going to reform and change and try to be citizens of the countries we come from. Now, there was Haredi anti-Zionism, like Satmar Hasidism. They relied on the three oaths in the Talmud, as many people know, to say they could not return to Israel until the Messiah came. They also did not think Jews were white colonizers. They had a particular theology that said we couldn't return to our ancestral homeland until messianic intervention. So anti-Zionism actually comes from a number of other sources. Why am I talking about all this? Because the whole question today around our big tent, can we let anti-Zionists into our communities? What do we do about Jewish anti-Zionists? Has been obscured by refusing to recognize that the anti-Zionism we encounter today, which should be written without a hyphen because it is not a debate with Zionism, it's a system of anti-Jewish libels. That anti-Zionism has no historical relationship to the Jewish anti-Zionism of the past, right? And so we have to be really clear about that. We have to name and condemn and set boundaries on anti-Zionism as a hate movement. On the basis of that historical discussion, I'll just return to what now the movement against anti-Zionism is doing. We think it's really essential that we develop a language that is not constantly only condemning anti-Zionism when it looks like classical anti-Semitism, when it's about hook-nosed bankers who are infiltrating your society. Right? We need to name and condemn anti-Zionism as such. We need to name its central libels. And so that's the work that the movement against anti-Zionism has been doing. We've seen on social media people using a more direct language to fight back against the Jew haters that they are constantly inundated by, and we have seen many of those anti-Zionists recede when we use this language. So we offer trainings where we actually teach people how do you respond to anti-Zionist abuse in a workplace, on campus, in labor unions. We help people write letters, but this is not work that we can do by ourselves. We actually want to be put out of business. We want, for those who are listening, we are very open about this. We want the Jewish legacy organizations to launch a mass campaign against anti-Zionism. Remove the hyphen. Whenever you condemn anti-Semitism, always say, I condemn anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. As everyone is very familiar with now, we have many people who are engaging in the most barbaric Jew hatred, but they will say, I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm just anti-Zionist. We say, well, actually, we need to stop allowing people to do that. We condemn anti-Zionism itself. Even if you say you're not anti-Semitic, we condemn anti-Zionism. We also don't accept hatred against Israelis and Israel as a state. We don't accept Israel hate. So the goal of the movement against anti-Zionism is actually to arrive at the public reckoning that is needed since October 7th, right? The anti-Zionist hate movement has generalized a narrative into mainstream culture that is winning and that is capturing our society. The narrative is that October 7th might have been an unfortunate event, but Israel's response revealed the truth to the world, that Israel has been evil and genocidal this whole time. We were lied to for 75 years. Anti-Semitism was a lie. Israel is the true evil in the world. They're winning because the Jewish community has not offered its own counter-narrative, its own coherent cultural narrative about what has happened since October 7th. In our view, what has happened, which is also the truth, is that anti-Zionism, which has a history which already existed in the Middle East and the Soviet Union, it purged 850,000 Mizrahim from their homes in the Middle East. That was anti-Zionism. They were marked as Zionist traitors and purged. It committed a cultural genocide of Jews in the Soviet Union. It destroyed Jewish life, Hebrew, synagogues, yeshivas, etc. in the Soviet Union. It has a trail of harm. It has predictable social consequences. It's come to the West. The great evil that has emerged and revealed itself since October 7th is not Israel, it's anti-Zionism. That's what we need to get the world to see. We need the public to see that. We need a cultural reckoning with anti-Zionism and its harms, and that is what we're trying to do. It starts within, it starts from our particularity, as Rabbi Ami Hirsch was talking about, as Jews, finding ourselves as Jews, being confident in our own self-determination and peoplehood, and then spreading this outward, speaking outwardly to the world and setting boundaries and saying we refuse to accept anti-Zionism.
Thank you very much. We see a glimpse of our future and we like what we see. Ashir, you want to share with us some of your experience at the synagogue?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Rabbi Ashira Boxman, and I am so humbled and honored to be asked to be here today. What an amazing initiative I've been following for a while, and I feel so grateful now that I have become an ordained rabbi this past May to have the opportunity to speak to you all. So like I said, I was ordained rabbi at HUC New York just this past May. I started at Temple Bethel in Boca Raton. Shout out Rabbi Dan Levin. I started there in July, and I'm coming up on 1 year being a rabbi. Very fun. And I would say my Zionist passion, my Zionism really started out in the womb, truly. I was born to Rabbi Brad Boxman, some of you may know. He is a liberal Zionist, truly at his heart, and really taught me as a young child to go out and explore and become the Zionist who I want to be, without putting too much pressure on who that was. And I would say that also is kind of what led me to where I am today. He put that idea of becoming a rabbi as just a regular career, you know? You look to your parents, what do they do? Oh, a rabbi, I could become a rabbi. But then it was all the experiences that I was given. I'm so grateful that I was given growing up in the Reform movement. I am a URJ Camp Harlem alumni. And I did Nifty EIE high school in Israel, which is now MUS. And I led a lot of Nifty in Israel trips as staff, and I really went through, I would say, that reform pipeline, and which I'm very proud of. And in addition to that, though, I went to a modern Orthodox Jewish day school, and I served on the board of my college Chabad. And so I would say the beauty and the thing that I love about my Jewish upbringing is that it really was a tapestry. It included all different types of Judaisms, all different types of practicing, and it allowed me to really experience that love of peoplehood. And that is something that I've been very passionate about. I actually wrote my my thesis on Jewish peoplehood and studied Mordechai Kaplan. And I think that thank you, Mordechai Kaplan's pretty awesome. And so growing up, like I said, I really grew up in all these Jewish spaces, and they were always Zionist. I wasn't unique for being a Zionist. I never felt like I was different or singled out or any of that. And I say this with great sadness. Unfortunately, the first place that I experienced anti-Zionism and really learned about how strong it was in a lot of ways was when I attended HUC. And that was really upsetting and shocking. truly shocking, because I was like, I grew up going to Jewish summer camp, high school in Israel, I went to campus Hillel and Chabad and all these places, and of course I heard about it around me, of course. But then going to my Jewish, rabbinical, reform seminary and experiencing students, colleagues of mine that were spewing all this anti-Semitic rhetoric, anti-Zionist rhetoric, I was shocked. I will admit that it definitely pushed me to look at things differently, and I really appreciated that. I learned a lot, and still I would say that, being a Zionist in all those places as it was, I never felt, propelled to go much further with the passion and take it to new levels. But being in an environment where all of a sudden I was unique, I felt the need to really go to the next level with my Zionism. And so while I was at HUC, I started that charge, and I'm grateful to say that Rabbi Josh Weinberg helped me. I went to him and experienced and shared my concerns over what I was experiencing, and the lack of Israel education that I found in the seminary, not even education, the lack of conversation. I just wanted to talk about Israel with my friends, with my colleagues, and everybody was I would say they were too scared. They were too worried, what if I say the wrong thing, or I'm gonna, be yelled at if I say this, or there was this hesitance, and that really bothered me. I said, how are we being set up for success in the rabbinate if we can't even talk about Zionism between our colleagues? How are we gonna talk about it with our congregants? And so I went to Rabbi Josh Weinberg, and he was very eager to help me. And we started once a month sessions at HUC, and the program was entitled Engaging with Israel from the pulpit and individually, right, and with our colleagues. And the idea was that I would bring together HUC students, we would come together, and we would talk about all the ways that we might find Zionism within our work. And I remember the first time that we met, one of the activities we did is we asked everybody to draw a diagram of all the ways of where Zionism might fit into the work that they're going to do as a rabbi. So we drew, bar and bat mitzvahs, sermons, all the different places in the rabbinate where you might have to talk about Zionism. And the idea was to prove that this is not something that we can avoid. This isn't a topic that we can just go through our rabbinate avoiding. We're gonna have to talk about it. And so just to face that reality was so important. Unfortunately, I will say that it ended shortly after because there was no real mass of people coming. It was my friends being supportive for me. And so that was unfortunate because I would have liked to see that go further and actually make real change, and I don't feel that it really did. During my time at HUC, I also joined some arts missions to Israel. I went on a Just Zionism mission with Rabbi Josh Weinberg, and I thought the idea behind it was genius. The idea was that we were going to bring Reform Jews, young Reform Jews, to Israel and visit partners on the ground in Israel who portray the same liberal Jewish Zionist values that we believe in here at home. And the idea was to bring, those Jews that were kind of on the cusp of being anti-Zionist and trying to show them, you actually are a Zionist, you're a liberal Zionist, and there are people on the ground there that share those values with you. Genius. And the thing that I would say I wish there was more of is I wish there was more follow-up after. I wish that there was more discussions and meetings after to continue discussing and debriefing what actually happened on that trip. I think that would have been helpful to the cause of the idea. But that was an awesome initiative that I participated in. Also, as an intern, a rabbinic intern, I was at Largemont Temple in Westchester, and I taught a Israel course through AJU. To 11th and 12th graders, and that was awesome. It was incredible to see the eagerness, the curiosity of these 11th and 12th graders and the stories that they shared with me of what they were experiencing in their schools and online, and that they were just so happy to have a safe space to talk about all of this and actually gain tools to respond to these comments that they were getting. And then now being in a synagogue, I see Zionism coming up in many different ways and forms. I was really proud to attend the World Zionist Congress and come back and share that with my congregants and the teens at Temple Beth El. A few weeks ago for Yom Ha'atzmaut, we did a program for our high schoolers where we actually had a panel of Israelis and Jews in the community who are involved with Zionism or participated in or served in the IDF or made Aliyah. And I was amazed watching the kids' eyes just open up, their mouths widen at the awe of these individuals' stories. I'm a big believer in stories, and that it's not just education. It's not just education that we need to give the future generation. Yes, that's important. It's experiences. It's not just up here that they need it here, because education's only gonna go so far. And so I truly believe that hearing other people's stories of what they've experienced, how they experienced their Zionism, what they've gone through, what's connected them, is how we inspire the next generation to join us in Zionism. I could continue, but let's get some questions.
You functioned in two very different kinds of settings, but having said that, I'm very interested in the question, the anti-Zionists that you confronted, where did they come from? Were they products of ignorance? Were they products of the general culture where they picked up anti-Zionist signs? Were they committed ideological anti-Zionists? This hatred, this hostility towards Zionism, where did it come from?
So they're products of left-wing academic and activist spaces. So some of these people had already been engaged in anti-Zionist activism. Many of them found out about this, the day after October 7th. They heard people saying, well, Israel is a white settler colonial state, and everything they had learned in the academy and activist spaces, that white supremacy was evil, that colonialism is evil, that racism is evil, and that Israel now is being described as a white supremacist state attacking innocent brown people, that just fit perfectly into the grooves of what they already understood. So anti-Zionism is a scapegoating of Israel according to the moral values of the time. Now, unfortunately, to be honest, the Jewish community has not done a great job of naming anti-Zionism and teaching about it. We've done an amazing job on Holocaust education and classical anti-Semitism that comes from the right. But our frameworks and language, we continue to call this anti-Semitism, assuming that it's going to look like classical anti-Semitism. However, the problem is the keffiyeh-clad activist on Columbia's campus calling for resistance against white colonizers is actually never going to take off their keffiyeh and start looking like a skinhead. They are actually going to remain a left-wing Marxist keffiyeh-clad activist who wants to murder white colonizers, right? So, but we haven't developed the language and the frameworks to name and condemn that anti-Zionism as it is. We use a framework which we describe at MAZ, at the Movement Against Anti-Zionism, as cross-the-line discourse. So we talk about when does anti-Zionism cross the line into anti-Semitism, right? So when is Hassan Piker going to reveal himself to be Nick Fuentes? Right? He was wearing this Marxist mask. He was pretending like he cared about Cuba and supported Cuba. He was really Nick Fuentes. He's really a neo-Nazi. He really is about white purity in the United States. That's never going to happen. Hassan Piker is always going to be Hassan Piker. He's an anti-Zionist. We need to show that that's bad. We also have talked a lot about double standards, delegitimization and demonization. That's the 3Ds model of Natan Sharansky to understand when criticism of Israel supposedly becomes anti-Semitic. While this makes sense in the abstract, it doesn't name the core libels and tropes that we deal with today. So, kids are being bullied and harassed and abused in schools because they're being called a white colonizer. And we don't have any institutional traction on that, because there's no anti-Semitic tropes involved, and we don't really know how this is a double standard. Is it a double standard? It's a trope. It's a way of constructing Jews. So we have both. We have people who were committed anti-Zionists, and we have so many who've immediately joined because there isn't any dam on it. So if we look at what's happened since October 7th, it was the Al-Aqsa flood. That flood went global. It is now pouring through our society. It is taking over society. It's taken over the New York Times with Christoph's dog rape libel, with the most recent piece by a senator, which basically repeats all of the anti-Zionist libels of apartheid, genocide, etc. That piece is being shared by Elizabeth Warren and Democratic senators. The Democratic Party is completely consumed by anti-Zionism. None of them even know that this comes from Soviet agitprop, that the KGB had a major role in inventing Zionism as racism, as colonialism, as genocide. They don't even know. So we have a job to do. We've done one half of the work. Holocaust and classical anti-Semitism that comes from the right. We now need to do the other half of the work, anti-Zionism that originally comes from the left. Why has that been hard for us as progressives, right? People here today who are liberal Jews, right? Sometimes we have a blind spot about stuff that's coming from the left because it recodes left-wing language. It recodes progressive commitment to justice. So what we are doing with Maz is we are showing that anti-Zionism is the injustice. Right? Anti-Zionism is about erasing an indigenous people. Anti-Zionism is genocidal. So we need to show people that it's a progressive value to be against anti-Zionism. And that is how we will win back a lot of these people, including anti-Zionist Jews, when they can see that if you're against anti-Zionism, that's actually a better way to support Palestinians, because endless anti-Zionist war harms Palestinians. Right? That's a better way to show compassion for both peoples, Israelis and Palestinians. So that's really the shift we need to make.
I'll shoot a short answer. I have experienced anti-Zionism mostly, I would say, unfortunately, within the Reform movement. And so my theory on it, and I will say that I was very impressed with Rabbi Jonah Pesner and Rabbi Josh Weinberg's article that they recently put out, that Zionism and social justice are intertwined, because I think if that was portrayed years ago, unfortunately, I wish it was, I think we might be in a different place with our now Reform leaders. I have a theory that I believe a lot of HUC rabbis who are going to rabbinical school, a lot of the motivation to get there has been solely social justice, which is beautiful, and I want to commend that. And I think that there's this missing link that social justice and universalism gives way to particularism and Israel, and that they're not connected. And I think that if we would have announced that they are connected and tied, and we taught that to this generation, that they are not one or the other, but they're together, and that's what brought our social justice warriors to HUC, I think we would be in a very different place. And so I think going forward, to put that emphasis on Tikkun Olam, Ahavat Yisrael are intertwined and they cannot be separated, I think we would find ourselves in a very different place, and I hope to continue promoting that. I think that's beautiful.
We're going to jump back a little bit, Julia. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
And could you take maybe 5 minutes and give us kind of an overview of what the work is that you do on campus?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me today. So always glad to be here in the synagogue. My name is Julia Jassy. I am the CEO and co-founder of an organization called Jewish on Campus. Thank you. As the name would suggest, we work with college students, and the goal is two things. Of course, combating anti-Semitism, but it's also engaging across boundaries of Jewish advocacy and also Gen Z advocacy. When you think about my generation, what's defined us for over a decade has been the idea that we can be voices for ourselves, that a traditionally kind of top-down way of viewing advocacy, maybe we can challenge that with a bottom-up view of advocacy. Maybe we can be powerful. And that's great. Thank you. That's wonderful. And it's led to so many young people being engaged in so many critical issues. But it's a place where the Jewish community has missed the boat. Traditionally, Jewish advocacy has been top down. It hasn't been something that we've been able to reach Gen Z. And that's a huge impetus into how anti-Semitism has been growing so vastly. When you think of the cultural zeitgeist amongst Gen Z, it's the idea of how can we be voices for ourselves. And anti-Semitism has largely been framed as speaking truth to power. A lot of people come to campus, which is my predominant related issue, and they don't go and say, I hate Jews. They go and the person sitting next to them in their economics class says, hey, do you care about climate change? Well, I'm having an event today about how Zionists are destroying the environment. Come along. It's your friend that you trust and you care about climate change. Of course you're going to go. The Jewish community has not been able to reach that audience. We've kind of stuck to these infrastructural ways of viewing how we can advocate, where a very impressive educator will come to campus and teach us about what anti-Semitism is, but we're not reaching beyond the Jewish community because it has to come from your peers. And especially in a post-COVID world, that looks like understanding and engaging with social media. Social media is the new town square for Gen Z and Gen Alpha. It's the place where people get their education. A large percentage of young people today get their education and breaking news from TikTok. It's kind of interesting if you think about it. It's a new form of media. It's a place that can encourage young journalists to start sharing information, and there are zero checks on mis and disinformation. And the algorithm, which sounds like this big scary word, feeds on that. What is the algorithm? It's posts that get engagement, comments, likes, shares. Even if those comments are saying this is terrible, even if those shares are sending it to a friend to talk about how terrible it is, the algorithm does not know that, and it boosts that post. So more and more and more people see it. It boosts the post way faster than it can be fact-checked, and the more inflammatory and extreme something is, the more people are going to naturally be reacting to it. We need to understand that ecosystem, and we need to thoughtfully, carefully engage in it. We need to understand that people are falling victim to anti-Semitism not because they go into an environment hating Jews, but because that, to them, looks like punching up, speaking truth to power, not punching down, speaking truth to power. That leads to things which I'm sure we'll get into later, like the trend toward anti-normalization. Anti-normalization is the belief that if you speak to somebody, engage with somebody, host an event with somebody who you disagree with on a moral level, that you are enabling that you are participating in that. So that leads to things like progressive groups boycotting working together with Hillels on campus. That leads to Zionists, no matter how you define that word, being banned from joining certain groups on campus. But those are places where Jewish students want to be. Jewish students want to care about these issues. Jewish students want to care about climate change, racial injustice, these kind of fundamental pieces of the Gen Z experience. And so we need to find ways, and that's kind of what Jewish on Campus is doing, with thousands of students across the country, engaging on the highest levels of advocacy, and finding how we can reframe the narrative into one that will actually reach Gen Z, one that will change hearts and minds because it's speaking in their language, and carefully at the same time, not descending into inflammatory rhetoric that won't allow us to use powerful mechanisms of change. We were the only student group to engage and work with Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff on creating the first White House National Strategy to combat anti-Semitism. So we're taking this movement of young people and translating it into action and social change. And I think that's the key piece. You can't just legislate away anti-Semitism. You also have to change culture.
Do we have some questions from, are they supposed to be writing them down? All right, since this is taking a minute, I'm going to take the freedom of calling on somebody without a card.
Thank you. Mark Frigo.
Would you mind standing up and speaking up?
From Miami Beach, Temple Beth Shalom. Thank you so much for your brilliant comments. I wanted you to think about social media as a Gen Z. And what would be 3 things things that you could do quickly that would boost this initiative that we're trying to support?
I'm happy to take that one, for sure. And that's kind of the heart of Jewish on Campus. Actually, we started as, an Instagram account that became very popular, and we translated that to creating a nonprofit around it. I guess 3 things. Number 1, you have to speak in the language of Gen Z. That means working with Gen Z. Because we grew up, we have had, unfortunately, Instagram in very formative years of our life. We know what it's like to create a social media post because we consume that content, for better or for worse, every single day. So working together with those people who are directly the target, like working with your target audience, is the best way to have that be authentic messaging. Number 2, I think understanding that, kind of going by the lowest common denominator, words like Zionism are defined by whoever is using them. So how can we make our definition explicitly clear? How do we not let those definitions be co-opted by people with bad intentions and instead assume that people have no idea what we're talking about, because how could they unless they hear it from us firsthand? And number 3, I think it's quick reaction time. People posting is instantaneous, for better or for worse. That leads to mis and disinformation. But if you're responsible and something happens and you're able to get that post out within an hour or even faster, you get to be ahead of whatever mis and disinformation is going to be put out by other people with bad interests.
Adam, please tell us how the federations and other legacy Jewish organizations have interacted with you. Okay. I'm holding this in my hand, so maybe speaking into it might make some sense. Adam, please tell us how the federations and other legacy Jewish organizations have interacted with you and the work that you do.
So there's been quite a lot of interest. We're in discussions with a lot of people. I will say we've had more movement actually out of the United States. So in Canada, we see more and more. We did a summit in Toronto where we trained 100 sector leaders from labor campuses, K through 12, and we see movement from CEJA, which is the main legacy organization in Canada. We see movement in Australia after the Bondi massacre. So our sister group, MAS Australia, MAS AU, has done incredible work. They emerged right in the wake of Bondi. They've been pushing at the Royal Commission into anti-Semitism that the Australian government has done to get anti-Zionism discourse in, to talk about anti-Zionism, to make sure that the government understands that the genocide libel is harming Jews. It's not acceptable, okay? So let me give you a counterexample to that, right? Marianne Williamson, if you know who she is, she's a Democratic politician. She ran for president. She is Jewish. She has tried to express some solidarity with what the community is going through. But what she said the other day was, well, whether you think Israel is doing a genocide or not, don't blame all Jews for it. That's the wrong way of understanding it, right? The genocide libel is the thing that's harming Jews. It constructs Jews as Zionist, as inherently genocidal. So that's luckily what MAS AU has managed to do. Now, when we come to the US, things are a little bit slower. There is hesitancy at this moment, to be frank, to name anti-Zionism, right? To actually give a word to the hate movement that we are witnessing. Often we want to call it something else. We want to say it's about the West, it's about Islam, or we want to continue to talk about anti-Semitism in the abstract instead of really hitting the bullseye, because names are power, attention is power. So once you have a name of the thing that is harming us as a community, once you can place attention on it, instead of attention always on Israel, you have power. So We are still working on that. I think the trainings we do are very helpful. So we've seen people in the legacy organizations who take the trainings and they come out transformed, and then they also want to see their legacy organizations make the shift from anti-Semitism discourse to anti-Zionism discourse. It happens through ongoing conversation, through internalizing a new framework, a new way of thinking, and it's so much about language, exactly like Julia was saying. It's about being fluent in these post-colonial discourses, in this woke language, for lack of a better term. And sometimes there's a little bit of a generational gap. I think older people are not always used to that kind of language, or it sounds kind of overly academic. But for younger people, for millennials and Gen Z, that sort of academic, activist speak is just how they speak and understand, right? When you translate anti-Zionism back to those people as, you know, it's racist discrimination, it's epistemic injustice, and use those terms, they can assimilate it and understand it. If you say Israel defends Western civilization, it has a right to defend itself against terrorists, they don't understand what that means, right? So that language is really important, and we want to bring the legacy organizations up to speed on that language.
Several of the questions ask, how do we reach out to those people who seemingly have made up their minds, who don't want to talk to us? Is there some kind of bridge that we can establish to open that conversation, at least get it started?
Yeah.
All of you in your own organizations and so on to deal with this in one way or another, so I'd be happy to hear from all three.
So I'll start. I saw a post just recently from Sarah Turtle Singer about this, actually, and it was this idea that once they get to a certain point of just seeing Zionism as anti-Semitism and really combining those two things and not looking at you as a person, but as a Jew who is a Zionist, and they won't speak to you past that, there's not much of an opening at that point. However, before they get to that point, when they're still thinking and they're willing to look at you as a human with complex emotion, with complex ideas, there is the opening. And I would say that I was really proud of proud of myself in rabbinical school because I was willing to engage in those conversations. Unfortunately, my year in Israel was canceled due to COVID. So we went for a summer, we went for 3 months. That was like 2 years into rabbinical school. And in those 2 years, like I said, I had experienced anti-Zionism, these questions and concerns about Israel that I had never seen before. And so going into that 3-month Israel experience, it was my job. I felt so committed to trying so hard to understand where my classmates came from. I was committed. I said, I want to understand. I want to know why they think how they think. I really want to push myself. I want to go to things that they go to, see what they're learning. And I did that. And I was so frustrated that unfortunately those on the other side were not willing to go to the things that I was going to, or willing to hear my opinion on things, or willing to engage in that discussion. And so, like I said, I think that on our end, we can do a lot to try to understand, to try to have those conversations, to try to see the other, to try to understand where they're coming from. But at the end of the day, it's really on the other to look at us as human and look at our ideas as valid as well.
Yeah. I think it's a long game, and that's part of what we have to understand. We're not going to see everyone change their mind in the next year because a lot of the anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist groups took the past 15 years to play this long game. I think that means we have to be smart and strategic about it, of course, speaking the language of Gen Z. The most pressing challenge, and I think the most pressing challenge to the Jewish community, period, is, I guess, when talking about anti-Zionism, this idea of anti-normalization. I mentioned this earlier, but again, it's complete shutdown of dialogue. It's the idea that if you speak to someone who disagrees with you, then you are enabling that belief. You're doing harm by having a conversation. Those aren't the people that we're going to reach. And I think we need to be smart and strategic about how we're doing that. That looks very daunting across the country. I think about examples of students at Tufts University who hosted an Israeli-Palestinian dialogue with Israeli and Palestinian activists, and that dialogue session was boycotted by their SJP. The speakers had to be escorted out later because of security concerns. These are examples of people trying to have dialogue. And we still have to keep doing it because the more public examples of people talking together, the more we break that stigma. And that looks different. That looks like speaking and listening. So for example, our chapters are students at UCLA and NYU doing events together with Iranian and Persian student organizations who know what it feels like to have their history weaponized against them. Our Emory chapter working with HBCUs and Black student associations who understand what it's like to feel misunderstood as a minority group. Finding places of inroads, like events that we've hosted between Orthodox Jewish and Muslim leaders who are women, Orthodox Reform and Muslim leaders. The goal was, how can we understand across the spectrum of Jewish experience, like a woman who has an experience of, for example, maybe experiencing misogyny because of how they dress or how they appear, that can be relatable across the spectrum. It's important to do these things, it's important to engage in dialogue, and it's really hard, and it's super uncool, and people will not want to be your friend. Okay, you don't want to be their friend anyway.
So in the wake of October 7th, when I got back to the local town and I was online and I was back in my intellectual community, this was one of the things I realized very quickly. You could not argue with these people. That is why these are libels. They are unfalsifiable accusations. There is no amount of counter evidence you can give to someone who believes Israel committed a genocide. They believe that because they want to believe that, because it's symbolically satisfying, because it legitimizes violence against Israel. There is no amount of counter evidence. So what do? Right? And then they're doing anti-normalization. They're saying they're not even going to speak to you. Right? We have to recognize that this isn't actually a factual debate. We have to move from factual debate to moral debate, to moral victory. And that's different than what we've done for a long time. Our usual Hasbara pro-Israel advocacy is we give people a ton of facts about Israel. I'll tell you the real story of 1948, the real story of 1967. I'll also tell you how great Israel is. It invented the cherry tomato. Israel has all these startup companies. I mean, Israel is such an incredible, successful nation. I mean, they'll actually like Israel less for that because they'll resent the prosperity and success of Israel and America. They don't like that, right? So we have to shift from factual argument to moral argument. It's not about saying, well, you have a sort of unnuanced view of Israel and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So this is somewhere where maybe this is in tension with some of the views of other people here. I'm not sure. It's actually not about coming to more nuance and complexity, at least with anti-Zionists. It's actually about coming to stronger moral boundaries and saying, actually, anti-Zionism is just wrong. I don't accept it. And when we can make the moral argument that anti-Zionism has a trail of harm, it has harmed Jews, Soviet Union, Middle East, it is wrong, it's discriminating against Jews today. When we can make that moral argument, that is when we will win. And then we can let people back in who are genuinely good faith. But we need to know how to distinguish between people who want to learn about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and people who are just spreading libels and are anti-Zionists, and they need to be shut out.
We have many questions and not near enough time, in fact, no time, to get to them, but our panelists are going to be here. I urge you to talk to them today and tomorrow, and I'm sure they will be helpful to you. Some fascinating questions on religious school. How can we do better in religious school? How can we convey a message that we're in favor of Palestinian rights? That's part of what we do. How do we deal with those sorts of issues? These are some of the questions that have been raised, and I hope you'll talk to our panelists about him. What's the bottom line here? We live in an era, not only with regard to Zionism, with regard to politics in general, of apathy and despair. we have given up in many cases, certainly in the political realm, but to some degree also in the Zionist and Jewish realm, on our ability to have some kind of positive impact and to move us in the direction of peace and understanding and dialogue and so on. The purpose of this program was to demonstrate you have people on the ground day to day who take the tough task of arguing with people who don't agree with them, may not like them very much, but who over the course of time ultimately can be convinced and maybe not brought into the Zionist camp, but at least can gain some greater understanding of what it is we do and of those values that are so precious to us. So talk to the people, and right now let's give a big round of applause to our panelists.